At the start of the movie, we witness a 9-year-old girl named Emma Grossman observing a cat drowning in a fountain from her room's window. Instead of showing any sympathy, she simply closes the blinds and continues with her morning routine. Emma lives with her widowed father, David Grossman, and although she excels academically and behaves well, she appears to lack any human emotions. During breakfast that day, Emma shares her aspiration of winning a citizenship award at school with her father. Just then, Emma's aunt, Angela, enters the scene and informs David about a new babysitter she has found for Emma, as the previous one had an unfortunate accident. While conversing, Emma points out the lifeless cat in the fountain. David retrieves the cat, but Emma remains completely unaffected by its demise. Later at school, the children are frightened by a wasp, but Emma fearlessly captures it in a glass and releases it outside the window. Meanwhile, David interviews a potential babysitter named Chloe, who impresses him with her portfolio and ultimately gets hired. Chloe seems to take an interest in David. Back at school, Emma encounters her classmate Katie, who accidentally bumps into her. Emma helps Katie up, and their teacher observes the interaction, suspecting that Emma is trying to display compassion in order to win the citizenship award. That night, Emma practices smiling in front of the mirror. The next day is the award ceremony, and David dresses Emma up and drives her to school. As the parents and students gather in the audience, the teacher announces that Milo has won the citizenship award, leaving Emma utterly disappointed. When David discusses Milo's victory with Emma, she claims that she was the deserving recipient and proceeds to insult Milo. However, she quickly apologizes upon seeing David's disapproving gaze. At a later time, when nobody is around, Emma decides to take Milo to a nearby cliff. When Milo suggests going back, Emma walks towards him and suddenly the screen goes blank. Later, when Milo's parents ask if she has seen him, Emma lies and says she hasn't seen him since the bonfire. Out of nowhere, 2 girls come running and screaming for help. All the parents rush to see that Milo has fallen off the cliff and drowned in the ocean. His father carries his lifeless body and attempts CPR, but unfortunately, Milo is already gone. The next morning at breakfast, David asks Emma how she feels, but she completely ignores the fact that her friend died the day before. Later, the new babysitter, Chloe, arrives at the house. That night, David is not home and Emma catches Chloe stealing some of his medicines from his room. Later, while watching movies, Emma confronts Chloe about the drugs. Chloe promises not to tell David if Emma gets what she wants. Emma then orders Chloe to get her some ice cream. Chloe insults the little girl but ultimately does as she is told. The following day is Milo's memorial, and everyone is in tears except for Emma. David speaks with Milo's parents and learns that the medal is missing, assuming it sank in the ocean. Suddenly, Emma starts crying too, as if she is pretending to be sad in front of Milo's parents. When they return home, David becomes concerned about Emma's behavior. While folding her laundry, he discovers that Milo's medal is hidden under Emma's mattress. David looks through the pictures from the award day and finds several pictures of Emma glaring at Milo. He begins to suspect that Emma had something to do with his death. Later that day, Emma's teacher, Mrs. Ellis, and a police officer visit David to discuss Milo's death. Mrs. Ellis claims that someone saw Emma with Milo at the cliff before his death. Emma eavesdrops on their conversation from the doorway. She pretends to trip and knock over a vase, pretending to be hurt, in order to interrupt the adults' conversation. Seeing Emma in pain, Mrs. Ellis and the officer leave. While tending to Emma's wound, David asks her if she was with Milo at the cliff, but Emma denies it. When he reveals that Mrs. Ellis said she was, Emma becomes agitated and shouts that Mrs. Ellis hates her. The next day, Chloe goes to the side house where David is working. She asks if she can smoke there, but David refuses, citing the presence of flammable liquids. Immediately after, Chloe takes Emma to the street to play with her scooter. While they're playing, they spot Mrs. Ellis's car parked in front of Milo's house. Mrs. Ellis is talking to Milo's mother. Chloe suggests that they are building a case against Emma, believing that Emma did something to Milo. However, Emma acts as if she has no idea what Chloe is talking about. When they return home, the conversation continues. Chloe warns Emma that if they find out what happened to Milo, Emma will be put in an electric chair. This frightens Emma, but she still refuses to admit to anything. Later that day, Chloe searches for Emma around the house and notices that the wasp nest that was previously in the ceiling of the outhouse is gone. Shortly after, Mrs. Ellis drives away from Milo's house. While driving, she is distracted by a wasp, which nearly causes an accident. As the camera pans to the back seat, we see the wasp's nest lying there. Emma had placed the nest in the car in an attempt to harm her teacher. Back at home, Chloe discovers Milo's medal under Emma's mattress. She hangs it on a lamp in David's dresser, hoping to catch Emma. Meanwhile, David is in the bathroom when Emma enters his room and sees the medal. She takes it off the lamp and hides it behind her, but David notices. He escorts her back to her room and confronts her about it. Emma lies and makes up a tale about Milo giving her the medal while they were playing. To clear his mind, David decides to go for a drive when he notices a car crashed on the side of the road. He also calls Angela and requests her help in finding a therapist for Emma. David starts having nightmares about Emma and Milo. The next day, Emma confronts Chloe about placing the medal there. She is furious. Just then, David comes downstairs and asks Emma to accompany him. He takes her to Milo's house to return the medal to his mother. She is confused but grateful that it has been returned. She then informs them about Mrs. Ellis's passing. She had a car accident due to wasps. David is taken aback. Emma starts crying, claiming that Mrs. Ellis was her favorite teacher. However, on their way home, Emma seems to have forgotten about Mrs. Ellis's death and talks about baking cookies with Chloe. David is unsettled by Emma's behavior. Later, while David is working in the outhouse, he notices that the wasp's nest is gone. He suspects his daughter of causing Mrs. Ellis's death. The following day is Emma's first appointment with her therapist, Dr. March. They have a lengthy conversation. After the session, the doctor informs David that Emma is just like any other normal child. She even fooled a psychiatrist. When they return home, David finds Chloe sunbathing in her sports bra. He asks her to go to Emma. As Chloe and Emma talk, she tells the little girl that David was looking at her in a suggestive manner earlier. She also mentions that she could be her stepmother. Furious, Emma yells at her to stay away from her dad. That night, Emma asks David if he likes Chloe. David is confused. She also reveals that Chloe wants to be her stepmother. However, David is running late for a date, so he leaves without giving her much of an explanation. Sometime later, Chloe is watching TV when she suddenly hears a noise. Concerned, she goes in search of Emma, but to her surprise, she cannot find her anywhere. As she looks out the window, she notices a shadow near the outhouse. Worried, she decides to investigate and heads towards the outhouse. However, as soon as she enters, the door slams shut behind her. Panicking, she tries to open it but realizes it's locked from the outside. Suddenly, a fire starts spreading across the floor, trapping Chloe inside. Desperately, she sees Emma watching her through the window, but before she can do anything, the fire engulfs her, ultimately leading to her demise. Later, David arrives home to find firefighters and paramedics at his house, informing him about Chloe's tragic death. Meanwhile, Emma has been taken to an official's home for safety. Finally, David reunites with Emma and embraces her tightly. That night, David visits Emma in her room and sits in front of her, expressing his love and concern. He gently asks her if she had hurt Milo and assures her that he will do everything possible to support her, but she must tell him the truth. Reluctantly, Emma finally admits that she pushed Milo off the cliff, justifying her actions by claiming he was going to report her for taking his medal. Nonchalantly, she adds that she won't do it again. David is horrified by her confession. He then questions her about Mrs. Levia, her previous babysitter, and Emma reveals that she pushed her down the stairs because Mrs. Levia had grabbed her hand. Emma argues that Levia should have been more careful. As Emma continues to speak, her aggression escalates. When David asks about what she did to Chloe, Emma angrily yells at him, blaming Chloe for trying to become her stepmother. David is filled with anxiety and disbelief, unable to comprehend that his own daughter could commit such a heinous crime. The next morning, the town sheriff contacts David, expressing his desire to meet Emma. However, David makes an excuse, claiming that Emma is unwell. Instead, he decides to take her to their lake house, far away from the town. Upon their arrival, they are warmly welcomed by their housekeeper. Later that day, the sheriff calls David once again, informing him that the fire was intentionally set by someone. But they have no idea who it is. Worried that his daughter might be caught, he is feeling anxious. David has a gun with him at home. He glances at it from time to time, contemplating if he should use it to resolve the situation. The next day, while David is asleep, Emma enters his room and kisses him. She proceeds to close all the windows and turns on all the gas stoves in an attempt to kill her father. Emma then goes to the lake and stays there. Just as David wakes up, he smells the gas filling up the house. He quickly opens the windows and turns off the stoves. He spots Emma outside by the lake and realizes that she tried to murder him. He approaches her and asks why she did it. Emma responds that if something were to happen to him, she would get to live with her aunt, Angela, who actually cares about her. David holds her hand and calmly brings her back into the house. Later, we see David crush his medications. Afterwards, he brings Emma a cup of hot chocolate. They both drink the hot chocolate together and David tucks her in to sleep. When he returns to his room, he calls Angela and confesses everything about Emma's misdeeds, but she doesn't believe him. He apologizes to Angela and vaguely mentions that he has no other options. It turns out that David had secretly added drugs to Emma's hot chocolate in order to overdose her, so she wouldn't harm anyone else. However, he doesn't disclose this to Angela. That night, while he is asleep, Emma enters his room. She holds a gun in her hand and aims it at herself. She pulls the trigger, but misses, with the bullet hitting the pillow next to David instead. The noise wakes him up and he questions how she is still alive. Emma reveals that she had switched her hot chocolate with David's. Realizing that she was about to kill him, David swiftly grabs the gun from her hand. Emma quickly grabs his phone and dials 911. She quickly dashes off to the bathroom, with David hot on her heels, determined to end her life. Emma urgently contacts the 911 operator, desperately informing them that her own father is attempting to murder her. David forcefully breaks down the bathroom door, brandishing his gun menacingly towards Emma. However, just in the nick of time, the housekeeper unexpectedly emerges from behind him, armed with a rifle. As David prepares to take Emma's life, he is instead shot by the housekeeper. Emma watches in shock as her father collapses to the ground, lifeless. The police promptly arrive on the scene. The next morning, Aunt Angela arrives, offering Emma the explanation that her father was likely unwell. The movie concludes with Emma embracing Angela, a sinister smirk on her face, revealing her cold and predatory nature. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and comment. It will take 1 second of you, but a great milestone for us.